Look at these frames, isn't that absolutely gorgeous? It's springtime here and the bees have been doing their amazing work filling these flow frame cells with their honey, with their nectar, doing their amazing work to de-water it and make this amazing stuff we call honey. And lucky for us, they often make more than they need and we can share some too. It's a beautiful view you get here in the rear window, and this is the flow frames that my father and I invented. And this cross section actually allows you to see the bees depositing nectar with their tongues. And if you missed the time lapse we recently put up, we showed a time lapse of the rear view, and we actually put out a question to see if anybody noticed what was going on. And I'll just explain what happened in that time lapse and we'll put a link below. So we've got the beehive up here on the balcony under shelter because we had the camera gear right here pointing at the hive. But what happens when you take the window off the hive is the bees start eating the honey away. And that's why it's important to leave this cover on. They see the light there and they move the honey inwards in the hive. So what we ended up doing was actually getting a time lapse of the bees eating honey away. And then just for fun, we flipped it into reverse. So while it looks like the bees are filling, to an experienced Flo Hive beekeeper, and a couple of people actually got it, they noticed that the time lapse was in reverse, because when bees fill, they're in a quite organised pattern like you see down here. And when they eat more like one cell out at a time, like you're seeing here in this checker pattern. So that time lapse that we shot with this hive was actually a time lapse of them eating the honey away, but it was reversed. So well done to those people who managed to tell that in the comments. It's a rainy day here. Questions, put it in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. We've got lots of new beekeepers, which is fantastic, so don't be afraid to chime in, ask those questions. We all started off as new beekeepers once. While we're waiting for you to put your questions in the comments, we might harvest some honey simply because we can, and it's something even on rainy days you can do with a Flo Hive. We were going to do a brood inspection today and get right in amongst the brood box where the queen's laying her eggs and everything's happening there to keep the hive going, but rainy days isn't the best time to do your brood inspections because all of the bees are home and they go a bit stir crazy, a bit like humans. They get a bit more grumpy if you pull their hive apart on a rainy day. Mid-morning to mid-afternoon on a sunny day is the best time to do your brood inspections. So, Sophie, would you like to come in and harvest some honey?
I would love to. It's my first time.
Because we've got a lot of beekeepers that are new to beekeeping, why don't we just run through it? And sometimes me explaining to somebody new to it is actually helpful because I might be moving quite fast and miss the little intricacies that actually are helpful to people getting started.
Great.
So first of all, you've got these brackets here, right? Mm-hmm. And you connect them onto the hive where you want to be harvesting. So our jars are this tall, so we're going to be connecting them onto that screw here. I'll show you how one works here. The easiest way I've found is you've got a keyhole, you go over the keyhole, then across and twist it into position. Now if that's a bit loose, then what you can do is tighten up that screw a little bit using the little L screw wrench that we have. And you might like to try the other side there. So if you've got tiny little jars, you'd be using these top screws. If you've got really tall jars, you'd be using these screws even way down here. And then the actual cover we took off in the beginning goes here as your harvesting shelf. Neat. Now next thing we're going to be doing is choosing a frame to harvest. So have a look there and tell me what you're seeing.
They're all looking pretty full. Definitely the ones through the middle are packed for sure.
And if you have a look in the side windows, that also tells a story. So you can go around and take the window cover off. And the windows really give you an insight into what's going on in the hive. Look at that, you can hardly see the comb because all the bees are home. It's a rainy day instead of them being out foraging. But beneath their feet you can just see the wax capping. And the wax capping is like a lid on a preserving jar. When they're happy with the moisture content down below that 20% range, they'll put a wax cap over the top so no more moisture gets into that cell, and that's them like putting a lid on a jar and keeping it for later in case they get hungry. So you've rightly identified, you can see that these cells are full, and if you look down the sides you can actually see the wax capping that they've put, and that gives you a really good indication that those frames have a lot of honey. And mixed with the side window and also keeping an eye on it over time, you can get an idea of whether the bees are filling or whether they're hungry and whether they're eating. The time to harvest is when there's an abundance of nectar and you can take a whole lot of honey away, and then there's still enough for the bees to use. So
Amazing.
if you get the tube here, you'll notice that it's got a little tongue on it. So when you choose a frame, you can pick one.
This one looks pretty good.
Okay, so you can take that little cap out. And then that little tongue goes in there and actually cleans out a little point we call the leak back point between the yellow and the clear. And that's an important little function because if you have a look at the frame next to it, you can see, yeah, that's good, just poke it in there, and it actually blocks that leak back point so honey won't drain into the hive while they're harvesting, but it also unblocks any wax that's in there so this doesn't happen. See how that honey's built up in here?
Yeah.
We can take that out and put a tube in and it will clean it out for us. Bees will be bees and they'll block up that little leak back point, so honey that drains into that area just over time then builds up. And if you leave it there too long, fermentation or crystallization can occur. So you're ready to go. You can put a jar underneath, and up here you've got this key access cover. If you go straight up, you can take the cap out of that corresponding frame. And then with the flow key, what you want to do is see how there's two slots. There's the bottom and the top.
Yeah.
You want to go into the bottom one because you're trying to lift all of the parts.
Okay.
So this long key is going to be the leverage to lift the parts. Now, it is hard. You can do a whole frame at once if you've got a really strong arm, but sometimes the wax and propolis is even too strong for that. So just going in part way at first will be easier.
Okay.
So you can turn that to a 90 now. And what that'll do is create pathways inside the comb for the honey to flow down and out into the trough. So you can already see it. But that looked easy enough, so you can go ahead back to a 90 and go in a bit further.
Further.
Yeah, you can even go further. I think it's that's it. I'll turn it again. Beautiful. And now you'll just see that beautiful golden honey just pouring out of the hive. And something's fallen in that jar randomly. I don't know, it's just a piece of grass that happened to be in the jar. We'll take that out. And you can go ahead and do the rest of the frame. All the way to the back till you feel it stop, and then turning it. So Sophie's a newbie on our team and she's here learning all about the Flo Hives and everything you need to do to keep your hives happy and healthy, and of course harvest the honey. If you've got questions, sing out. You're going to have to come close, Trace, because we don't have all of the microphones today.
Great. Looking good. Cedar Margie's asking on Facebook Live, is it okay to let your bees eat the honey if you can't get to harvest it? Are there any consequences with not harvesting the honey?
Not at all. You can leave the honey in there for the bees. The only caveat on that is in the springtime, your bees will be more likely to swarm if your hive's really full of honey, because they will then start putting honey where the queen needs to lay. And if there's not enough space for the queen to lay her eggs, then that is one of the primary triggers for the hive to swarm, which is their natural division where half of the bees take off and find a new location. So if you're trying to limit swarming, then you'll really want to harvest the honey in the springtime. But the rest of the year you can just leave it for the bees if you want to.
Right, wow, look how fast it's
Flowing
going.
so much
Yeah.
now. Wow.
Isn't that gorgeous? Okay, now here's the trick. You've got to swap the jar without spilling honey.
Oh, it's going so fast.
That's it.
Ooh.
Not too bad, but you
Not
get
too
to taste
bad.
that and see what it's like. Isn't that
Wow.
a beautiful colour? In the
So
springtime we get these gorgeous, really light colours, and the rest of the year we get these reds and dark tones. So it's great to see this honey coming in, but most places in the world have honey that's more like what we call a honey colour. But it really does vary because the bees will be foraging on different flowers at different times and filling the frames. So you'll often get a different flavour and a different taste in a frame next to it. So it's one of the joys of a flow hive is being able to isolate those flavours, and I really do recommend isolating the flavours rather than filling all the frames to a bucket, because it's just such a joy to share all the flavours. And when people come, it creates a real story at the table of sharing, oh, here's a dark one, here's a light one, here's a spring one, here's an autumn honey, and it's really is one of the joys of beekeeping, I think.
Seda, Carly's tuned in from Calgary in Alberta, Canada. Just wondering if they can have a flow hive there. They're a bit scared that they'll die during the Canadian Rocky Mountain winter.
So we do have a lot of flow hive beekeepers in very cold places, even right up in Nebraska. So you should be fine there in Canada. And one of the first flow hives we tested, aside from the work that my father and I did here in Australia, was in Canada. And it went extremely well. Now, it's quite a different season to we have here, because here we have almost a all year round honey season. We're in the subtropics, you can harvest honey in the winter, but where you are in Canada, you're going to get 6 or more months of very cold weather where there is nothing for the bees to actually forage on. So what you'll need to do is make sure the bees have enough storage of honey stores prior to the winter, and that way your bees will survive through to the next spring. Ask your local beekeepers how much that is. It might be a box of honey, it might be 2 boxes of honey you need. If they don't have enough, you'll need to feed them some sugar syrup prior to winter so they can build their stores. But what's really exciting in Canada is when things flower, everything flowers at once. So you get these enormous honey flows where people brag they can fill a whole box in a day, which is off the hook. It's unbelievable to hear that. The fastest we ever see it here is a week to fill a whole box of honey, and even that's fast, but to fill it in a day is just wild. And what you will find also in those extreme cold areas is people will like to run bigger hives. So they might run 2 brood boxes, or they might run another honey super or 3 honey supers on top. I've even heard of 5 honey supers. But one thing with the flow hive is you can change the mentality a little bit, and instead of storing honey in the hive to harvest at the end of the season in the conventional way, you can store honey in jars on the shelf and keep harvesting as the season progresses.
Fantastic. Seda, Robert's asking what version or model of hive is this that we're harvesting from?
This is our Flo Hive 2 Plus. So over time, we've listened to all the feedback and we've tried to solve more problems in beekeeping, making it easier. So we have the pest management tray down the bottom. We've got the screen bottom board, and then we've just done things like put little levels in the hive on the side and at the bottom here, and made adjustable feet to take out that work of really trying to level a surface. You're out there with a mattock in your garden trying to make a nice flat surface. Well, it's a little bit easier with these adjustable legs because you can just adjust each corner till the level bubbles in the middle. And then the tray here helps with hive beetles. You can put some oil in there and catch those pesky beetles if you've got the small hive beetle in your area. And also helpful for being on the lookout for Varroa numbers. You can use that tray or put a sticky board in there to check your hive for Varroa numbers, which we've got a lot to learn about here in Australia with the Varroa mite here on our shores now. And then we've gone and added more observation windows and brass details and things, but we still sell our original classic hive as well. So you can choose this one. It's just got more features to make beekeeping a bit easier. And you can choose between whether to have the stand with it or not. There's a solid aluminium stand here that just integrates with your bottom board.
Great. So there's a few people asking, and we get this a bit, I think, in customer support. A, why are there always 2 boxes, and does the hive come with 2 boxes? And what is the difference between the brood and the super?
So the brood box down here is usually the bottom box in a hive, and it's just got wooden conventional frames as it's been for hundreds of years. And in there, you've just got the bees building their conventional wax comb in the frame. So that's what bees have always done, whether they're in a tree hollow or in a hive. But the wooden frames just help keep it organised. And it's a really important part of beekeeping is to be able to service your brood box. And in those frames, you've got the honeycomb that they've built, and the queen will be laying eggs in the cells, more so in the centre of the hive. Then as you move out from that centre position, you'll get pollen stores, which they're turning into bee bread and fermenting it. You get honey on the edges and around the top as well. So that's a going beehive, the bottom. And what we do is we come and put our Flo Hive Super, which is the invention my father and I came up with and launched to the world in 2015. We put it on top, and when the bees have excess honey, they start storing it up the top, and then we get to share some too.
Sure do. And so Maureen's asking, do you treat the mites the same way in a Flo hive as you would in a conventional hive?
Yes, Varroa mites, and if there's all different management strategies around the globe. If you've got Varroa mites in your area and you've got your favourite strategy to manage them, chime in below. We're all ears at the moment, learning about how we should tackle them here in Australia. So it's likely to be spreading throughout Australia sort of over the next 6 months, couple of years, 5 years time frame. It'll probably get to all corners. So there's a few, quite a few methods. Some involve putting strips in the hive. Others involve manipulating the drone comb in there and taking that away, because that's where a lot of Varroa tend to prefer the drone cells. So there's all sorts of strategies, and we'll be getting into those in the coming months as we learn more about it. And if you want more information on that, have a look at thebeekeeper.org. We have an online course we put together with experts from all over the world, and they've chimed in with how to do beekeeping all over the globe, and that includes managing Varroa. It's free to try, and it's a great fundraiser too. We're really happy to have planted over 1.5 million trees now. The idea is we create literally billions of blossoms for bees to forage on, and of course all of the other species that desperately need more habitat. So you can have a look there to find out more about Varroa.
Fantastic. A few questions about smaller spaces, and the first one's from Joy, really interested in keeping bees in an urban area. But just how do you know if there's enough pollen around for them?
urban areas are fantastic for keeping bees because people plant all sorts of things, and what it does is give you a really extended honey season. So bees are said to even do better in the city, which seems a bit counterintuitive, but because of all the parks and the things people plant, you get this really long, steady honey season, great for bees. So people will be keeping bees on their rooftops, on their balconies, and so on. So here's a hive on a balcony, but we are in a rural setting here. My sister kept bees in Berlin for a couple of years, right on her balcony, so that's a common thing to be able to do. And what's fantastic about beekeeping, I think, one of the things is it takes up a very small footprint. You can literally have a few hives on your balcony and get a real amount of produce you can share without having to have a farm, yet you're farming. So I think it's one of the things humans yearn to do, is actually be able to do things that make produce for themselves. So beekeeping is great like that because it only takes up this much space. And with the Flo Hive, you don't need a whole shed dedicated to the honey harvesting and processing setup. It's literally all contained within the hive.
Great, and you've sort of answered the other questions about small backyards and smaller spaces being able to keep a hive. So I think you nailed that one. Just a few people asking where do you buy them and do we ship to different countries. Just check out honeyflow.com and also just contact customer support if you're wanting to know where we ship to. Adam's asking, what's the stain we've used on this hive?
So this is a deck coat. So what we've found is if you go for the oils, the wood looks fantastic for a while, but you get 6 months, 12 months in, the sort of volatiles evaporate away, leaving oil left behind, which mildew will feed on, and it starts to look not so good. Although it doesn't harm your woodware, it just doesn't look as good anymore. So what we've found is the water-based decking products are made to keep timber looking like that fresh timber look outdoors. So if you go to your local hardware store and have a look at the decking products, you can choose those to put on the outside of your hive. Now, if you've got the Araucaria hive, I would recommend an outdoor house paint. The cedar will last longer outdoors if you're trying to keep it looking like wood, like this, but the Araucaria won't. You'll need to put an outdoor hard-wearing house paint on that, and you can put a nice design over the top of that if you want to get carried away with your family doing an artwork.
Great. Lonzo's saying recently harvested some honey from one of a really stronger colony that they had in the Flo Hive. Just noticed some ants in the bottom of the flow frames pouring into my jar. Lonzo's just wondering how you think that may have happened, that the ants have got in there.
Interesting. It's unusual for the ants to get into the trough section because we've made quite a tight fit here. So keep an eye on it, and if it happens again, there may be what's called a miss shot in the manufacturing, where a tiny piece of the flow frame is missing, allowing ants to get into this area. The most common cause is you've left the cap off for a little while and a bunch of ants have gotten in there. So if you keep these caps on, it shouldn't happen, but if ants keep getting into that area with the cap on, then let us know and we'll try and work out where they're getting in.
Right. Marcello saying loves the flow frames, harvested from 2 of them for the first time 5 days ago, and noticed that the bees have moved honey from the adjacent frames, and the harvested frames seem to have honey building up again so fast. They're in Melbourne and just wondering, is that normal that they'll move the honey around or that they'll fill up so quickly?
It's fantastic when they're filling up. Typically springtime is the time when you get that exciting thing. You harvest all your frames, then a couple of weeks later they're full again, and it's just amazing. And that can either be from the nectar coming in, and that's usually what's happening. They're just bringing in a lot of nectar from the flowers because the flowers are dripping to the ground with nectar in the springtime. Or as you say, you will get a bit of movement from the bottom to the top. So they might be clearing out some honey to make way for egg laying down the bottom, because they do store a lot of honey down in the brood box as well. So they'll literally suck it out into their honey stomach, walk upstairs and then regurgitate it into the cells. And while they're doing so, they actually take more moisture out of it as well. So exciting, great to hear you've got an amazing honey flow there in Melbourne.
Yeah. So it's, just wondering, Oksana's wondering, do you get much leakage and how do you deal with that when you're harvesting?
So sometimes you get honey spilling into the hive while you're harvesting, and I never saw that as an issue because in conventional harvesting I used to spill a lot of honey into the hive because typically you'd have a migratory roof on there and you'd be cracking that off and breaking a whole lot of comb, and that comb would be raining honey down into the hive, and it'd even come out the entrance, and over time, over that day, the bees would clean it all up. However, some people don't like honey spilling into the hive, and if it's causing you an issue, then what I suggest you do is harvest less frames at a time. So if you harvest 1 frame or 2 frames or 3 frames, it's unlikely to cause any issue. The bees will clean up any excess spills. Having said that, there's a few things to check when you are harvesting or prior to harvesting. And one is you want this level to be showing a 3-degree slope. We even had experienced beekeepers messing that up. They'd say, yes, my hive's level, and then when you actually went and checked it, the front of the hive might have sunken into the garden and the slope was the wrong way. So we put this here to really help. You want that level bubble in the middle, and you can adjust the legs to make sure it is. And that gives you that 3-degree slope backwards to make sure your honey is coming out into your jar. Now, if another thing can happen, and this is a good tip and something we've learned over time, is when you close the frame, you're putting this key up into the top slot and turning it. Now, what that does is move the frames back into the cell formed position. But if you just do a quick close like this and move on and take the key out, what can happen is the frame parts go down and then they bounce back up a bit because you've got a lot of sticky wax and propolis. And what happens then in this area down here, they'll be making a wobbly shaped cell. A lot of wax gets builds up there. Then when you go to harvest next time, there's this glob of wax impeding the honey flow. So that's a good tip, is when you close the frame, leave the key in there for a minute or 2, and that'll just push those frame parts back down, and that'll stop that issue going forward. You can also leave a key in there on a hot day if you've found that your frames aren't quite forming into position, and what you'll find is the wax will soften and it'll move back. If you've left a frame in open position, and then you'll have for weeks, you might have to remove it from the hive, put the keys in the top, put it in a black plastic bag in the sun, and it'll all move back down. Another thing that can happen is, let's say you've had your hive for 5 years and the wax and propolis is really built up on the frames. Then it might be time to give them a good clean, take them out and use a pressure washer. Even better, connect that pressure washer to a hot water service and really blast all the wax off and put them in to go again. So that can help as well. If you're having problems where most of your honey is ending up in the tray or spilling out of the hive and not much in your jar, then get in contact with us, because there must be a reason why that's happening and we can help you problem solve it.
Right. So it's, how long can you leave your bees before adding another box to it?
So if you're setting up your hive, I assume you've got the brood box here, and now you're adding your super on top. What we like to do is leave it long enough so that they're using every frame, they've filled every frame with their wax, and you'll probably see them starting to build some wax on top of the frames. That's a good time to put your super on, because you can see they need more space. But that could be all season. It just is up to you as a beekeeper to monitor and see when they're at that stage and they're ready to put another box on top. Can happen really quickly, can happen in your first month, or it might not happen at all, but typically you'll be waiting several months before you put your super on, but springtime will probably be quicker.
Chris is wondering, are all these jars just out of one flow frame?
They are just out of one flow frame. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is number 6. You'll sometimes get 7 About, there we go, and another one. Look at that. Okay. So, so this is the 7th jar. Well done. It does vary a bit. You might get 5, you might get 7 out of a frame, depending on whether the bees have connected their wax and drawn it out beyond the flow frame surface, or capped it neat. And it's exciting when you get really good harvest, because if you go 6 7s here, 42, that's 42 jars from a hive that you could harvest, and in springtime you might be able to do that again 2 or 3 weeks later, which is just super exciting when that happens. But equally, you can be waiting all season and your hive might be a bit slow for some reason. Always recommend having more than one hive, because typically one will go great, another will be medium, and another will be poor. And if you really want to get some honey stores, then having a few hives is better.
Great, you've sort of answered a few other questions, Seeds, how much honey comes out of a heart, and also that these jars are actually, they're 300 ml, these jars, so that's 7, whatever that is, Seeds, when you work that out.
Just over 2
litres, yeah.
Just over 2 litres, which equals 3 kilograms of honey per frame. About, because honey is heavier than water. So you've got 3 kilograms times 7, which is just quite a lot of honey, and it's why you've got a heavy box, and why it's good to get a bit of a helping hand to lift that box off when it is full of honey, because unless you've been working out at the gym, it might be a little hard to lift the box off on your own. Of course, you can take some of the frames out and that'll lighten it, and then you can take the box off the hive to do your brood inspection.
Great. The Essential Lady Homeschool is asking, will the Flo Hive fit on her standard brood box?
It does. We've followed Langstroth sizing. Bee boxes vary a bit, so you'll find there might be a few millimetres difference, but this is a standard 8-frame Langstroth size. We've called it Flo 6 because flow frames are a bit wider than conventional frames in your brood box, because honey stores away from the brood nest. They typically build deeper cells, so it follows suit with what the bees do. So our Flo 6 is 8-frame Langstroth size. Our Flo 7 is a 10-frame Langstroth size, and they're the 2 sizes that are common around the world, so you should be able to match it up just fine.
Great. Leon's tuning in from Byron Bay, which is just down the road from here, has 4 Flo hives and is starting to expand their apiary.
Fantastic.
I know, how good is that? But just wondering, any plans for the Flo Hive 3, maybe with brood windows?
That's a nice feature request. If you've got feature requests, put them in the comments, and we always like to collect those, so that when it does come time to add more features, we have a good list of what is the most popular things to include. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and or Dick's asking, would you be able to get beeswax from a Flo hive?
You certainly can collect honeycomb and beeswax from a Flo hive. You can either collect it from the side of your brood box. Typically they'll put honey on the edges, and you can pull a frame out from the edge. Great thing to do in springtime because it limits the primary trigger of swarming. You can take a frame out of the edge, put a fresh one back in the centre, or if you're using naturally drawn comb, you just cut the wax out right then and there, like you've seen us do on the live streams, and put the frame straight back in the centre. You can also collect honeycomb under the roof. You can just take the roof off, take the cap out, and the bees will start building honeycomb up there, or even better, quarantine them to a smaller area using a glass baking dish or something like that, and that way you won't end up with a whole lid full of comb to clean up later. It's fun to let them build all up under the roof for a while, but you get sick of it eventually because there's a bit of work to scrape all of that comb off. But super fun for the kids because you can then use that wax for making candles and all of that.
Laura's got a suburban garden and just wondering how much room you need for the bees for their flight path, just trying to work out the best location in their suburban garden.
Great. So that's probably one of the first things you do as a new beekeeper is, where do I put my hive? What do I have to consider? So the things you're going to be considering is probably number one is the flight path, as you've said. So the bees typically want to race out of the entrance with enthusiasm, and they want to fly a few meters before they get up and away. So if you can, give them 2 or 3 meters of space before you've got a fence or something in the way. It's not the end of the world if you can't get that. They will just double back, but it means that the flight path will come back past you when you're harvesting honey instead of up and away like this. But more importantly, with the flight path, you just want to point it where there's not a thoroughfare, because what happens is if you've got people walking through this flight path, typically you get accidental stings from bees landing in people's hair and stuff like that. And the front of the hive is where you've got the guard bees. This is a pretty friendly hive, so I'm standing right here okay, but some hives don't like you near their entrance, and you'll find that they'll protect their entrance. So if you could point it somewhere where people aren't going to walk past the entrance, then that is a good idea. Mowing is another consideration. If you can situate it so you don't have to mow right in front of the hive, then that's better, because typically if you've got a noisy, smelly motor going right past the entrance, some hives will, some hives won't, but some will get very upset about that, and they'll certainly let you know, so you'll be needing to do your mowing in your bee suit. Next question people ask is, should it be in the shade or in the sun? If you've got a choice between full shade and full sun, then I would go full sun, because that'll keep away pathogens like chalk brood, which tend to breed up in a hive in shady, damp conditions. If you've got the choice, as you've got a really hot climate, then some afternoon shade in summer would be a helping hand for your bees, but it's not absolutely necessary. Other things to consider are pets. Some people fence their hive from their lovely fluff walls, but other people really just let the pets work that out, because a few stings on the nose and they will not go near it again. Livestock is another thing. If you've got livestock, then a fence is a good idea. You'll get curious cattle, might knock over your hive. If a hive's knocked over for a couple of days, sometimes your bees will abscond. So a few considerations there when you're finding the spot for your Flo Hive. As to how close to your house you have it, this one's sort of on the veranda here as part of the house, and it's a friendly hive. So if you are going to have a hive really close to your house, then it's worth getting some friendly bees off a bee breeder, and that way you've got these nice gentle genetics. An aggressive hive right close to your door isn't so fun, because you might find them getting a bit territorial and chasing away some of your guests.
Seda, does this, because the honey's coming out of the flow frames, does it have any plastic taste from the flow frames?
No, actually, it's one of the things about honey is if you store honey in metal, then you will get a really strong flavour imparting into the honey. So typically conventional beekeepers will harvest honey, they'll put it in a steel or stainless steel extractor as they spin the honey out, spin the honey out of the frames, and it coats that surface in honey and slowly dribbles down, and already you've got flavour imparting on the honey. You'll notice it even if you leave a teaspoon, or I can notice it, a stainless steel teaspoon in the honey for more than 10 minutes, you can taste the metal when you taste that honey. So I think metal's not a good thing to store honey in, whereas glass, believe it or not, glass will impart into water and honey as well. And the same goes for plastic, but it's so minute that I'll be very surprised if you can taste it. And there has been no complaints, and the plastic we've chosen for the frames is the very best food grade plastic, and it is designed to not impart any flavour or residue into what you're storing in it. So on top of that, the bees will actually cover the flow frame parts in wax, and you'll notice that over time your flow frames will be really building up in wax and propolis. So even inside that cell, there'll be this fine coating to separate the moving parts from the honey.
Great. Belinda's looking to get a few hives and live in country Western Australia. Just wondering what hives you'd recommend. They have lots of native trees and shrubs.
Western Australia, a fantastic place to keep bees. There's amazing medicinal honeys there too, and it's even a great export market there with people around the world really enjoying Western Australian honey. So any of our Flo Hives will be great. You can have a look at the features. This is the Flo Hive 2 Plus that has all the features in it that we've designed over the years. We also have our classic hive and our hybrid hive. We put the hybrid hive there. It's more for the people that want a lower price point. But it basically has just a few flow frames in the middle and conventional frames either side. Doesn't seem to be so popular. People generally choose this model, which is the full rack of flow frames and all the bells and whistles.
Great, I love this one. Carla's asked a question on YouTube in the South Island of New Zealand, and has had a nuke for 4 weeks, but her hubby's kindly poured a concrete slab and now a metre from where the hive is, and Carla wants to know, can they move the hive? And what's amazing is so many people have tuned in, but I thought I'd ask you anyway, Seeds.
Yes, absolutely, you can move a hive, and there's always a long answer in beekeeping for everything. But the simple way to move a hive across your yard is bit by bit. If you move it 1 or 2 metres a day, the bees will follow, because bees have this amazing sort of GPS location. And if you move it 3 metres, they'll come back here and go, where's my hive, where's my hive? And they'll start balling up on the railing, quite confused, even though the hive's only just over there. So if you just move it in stages, and you might like to put your hive on a trolley or something, and then you can just go out there and drag it another couple of metres a day, you can then move it across your yard. If you want to go further than that, and you want to do it in one go, then what I tend to use is it's a reorientation technique. So let's say you want to go right across your yard, or you want to go 100 metres away, 300 metres away, kilometre away, then the bees are going to go back to the original spot. But what you do is you put something at the entrance, like a whole lot of branches with leafy branches. So you move the hive, you put some leafy branches here, or you get an old shirt and tape it around the hive, leaving some little gaps at the edges. The enthusiastic bees come racing out of the hive, and they bang into this foliage or into this old shirt that's wrapped around the hive, and they go, something's different, something's changed. And what they tend to do then is reorientate, and you'll see them all buzzing around in a bit of a cloud, doing their orientation flight, taking in bearings, and then remembering the new spot to come back to. And that'll work for 95%. You'll still get 5% returning to the old location. You can let them randomly find another beehive to go into, or you can put a cardboard box there, collect those bees and ferry them across to the new location. Do that for a few days and you've got all the bees in a new location. Another very common way to do it in beekeeping is move it more than 6 miles or 4 miles, 6 kilometres. And if you move it, the bees won't remember their location anymore, and it'll force them to reorientate to the new spot. And then you can wait a month. All of the bees have changed over because they have a pretty high turnover of new bees, and then you can move it back again to the other side of your yard. So there's your options in moving a hive.
Right, Seeds, can you add a flow hive to a traditional hive? Or can you modify a Langstroth hive to tape the flow frames?
Absolutely. We thought that's what most people would do in the beginning when we were inventing the Flo Hive. And as it turns out, most people actually want it done for them. So we tend to do all of this nice woodwork, which you can get. You can either buy the frames with the super, just the top box to put onto a conventional Langstroth, or somewhere right at the beginning we put the instructions of how to cut out a conventional hive to then install your flow frame. So it's basically about cutting out this door and this orifice up here and bending over some nails or something as closures, and there you have a way to install flow frames in a conventional hive.
Great, Seeds. And then a couple of questions on, maybe it's sort of, you've sort of explained it as well, but also what makes the Flo Hive more expensive than just buying a Langstroth hive? Like, why is the Flo Hive a lot more expensive than your traditional boxes?
So we put a lot of effort into making this invention, and we also have it made here in Australia. So it's not like we're suddenly making a stupendous profit on each hive. We're tick-tocking along like a normal business, and this is the real expense of making all of this beautiful woodenware and these frames. So what makes it more expensive is, one, you've got this beautiful laser cut hive. You've got all of these features that are built in to help you in beekeeping, like the pest management tray, the screen bottom board, the adjustable stand, the ant guards, the hardware and screws. And you've got an inbuilt harvesting system that if you're thinking about expense, then it's not necessarily intuitive to compare and you need to be comparing apples for apples in a way, because what this is doing is it's replacing a whole lot of equipment. So you'll need to compare this setup to a conventional Langstroth setup, which might have a brood box and then probably multiple honey supers, because instead of storing honey in jars on the shelf as it comes in, you're probably batch processing, because otherwise it'd be a pain to get your whole extraction room going just for harvesting one frame. So you're typically going to be adding more boxes to your hive and storing honey in more boxes, more honey supers, and then batch processing at the end of the season. So you need to compare a standard Langstroth setup with multiple boxes to a Flo Hive, and then you need to add on the space, space required to have a honey processing setup. Then all of the knickknacks you need to do that to process honey conventionally, which you'll need an extractor, an expensive item. I used to run my 9-frame radial extractor, which cost about $3,000, and then you need a hot knife, then you need some other comb scratchers for where the knife can't get to. You need your sieving setup, so you can sieve out all the wax and bee bits, settling setup, and then honey gates on buckets and things, all to get to a product just like this. Once you've done all of that and settled it for a while and sieved it, you'll end up with a product like that ready for the table. So factor all that in if you're a little price sensitive when you're looking at a beehive.
Great. And tips and tricks, Seeds, for getting your bees to start putting honey into the super.
So if your bees are slow to take to the super, the best recipe is adding a little patience. You probably won't get them storing honey in the super till two things coincide. When you open the window, you've got a lot of bees in your hive, and there's a good nectar flow around. So you need lots of flowers with lots of nectar. And when those two things coincide, it'll happen quite quickly. But until then, it might be slow. But one thing you can do if you want to speed it up a little bit is scrape some of the honey off the top of the brood frames. Now, if your hive is ready for the super, it should be building a bit of wax actually on top of your wooden frames. So get your hive tool scrape some of that off. Doesn't need to have honey in it, it's the wax you're after. And then you can just use your hive tool to press that wax into the flow frame surface. You won't damage the flow frames. Put that frame in the window and you can enjoy watching them recycle that wax, coat all the frames in that recycled wax, and then you'll have them starting a bit earlier than you otherwise would have if you left it and waited. However, you still won't see honey stores till you've got a lot of bees and a good nectar flow.
Robert's wondering, Cedar, should you buy a queen or allow them to naturally choose their own hive?
So, there's a few ways of getting a queen if you need a queen. But what you're getting at there is how to start a hive. So let's say you're new to beekeeping, you've gone out and you've got your equipment, the next thing you need is your bees. So the easiest way to do that is to buy what's called a nucleus, which is an already going little mini hive about this big. It's got about 4 or 5 brood frames in it, and it's usually made out of core flute or something like that. Just a simple little box, and you can go and pick up that from a bee breeder. In there is a queen laying eggs. You've got frames that are already drawn out. You've got pollen stores, honey stores. You've got larvae, which is developing and will go through its metamorphosis stage. It's a going little mini hive. All you need to do is find a location for it, and then find a day in the next few weeks, ideally, but it could be a month depending on your timing. Get in your bee suit, get out your smoker, transfer them into your brood box, look after them, and they'll grow. Now, you can also order what's called a package, which is a bunch of bees. You can order that in the mail. You'll get some interesting looks from your postal service as they rock up, and you've got a buzzing box of stinging insects. But in there will be usually some syrup to keep them alive in transit, and a queen bee in a little queen cage. So what you'll do is then shake those bees into your box, put your queen in the little queen cage. There'll be candy at the end. The bees will chew away the candy and she'll be released into the hive, and away they go. It's an artificial swarm in a way. You can also catch a swarm in springtime. Jump on those Facebook pages, put some signs around, and you'll likely have the opportunity to catch a swarm. We've got plenty of videos showing you how to do that and how to do that live. In fact, Sophie here, who's been harvesting the honey while I've been rabbiting on, one of her first things she did when she joined the hive here was catch a swarm on the mango tree. So if you missed that, dial back and have a look. Great way to get started in beekeeping too. You can also buy queens in the mail. Let's say you've lost your queen, then you can order a new queen, and she'll come in a little queen cage with about 5 escort bees, a block of candy at the end. When it arrives, you'll need to just keep it watered by a little bit of water on your finger on the outside of the cage. That's all they'll need, but try and install it as soon as you can into your hive that hasn't got a queen. But you can also do what's called a bait hive. So that's the 5th way to get started with bees. Now, if you just put your hive out, it's very unlikely you're going to get bees that will randomly find it and move in, unless you're near a whole bunch of beehives and it's springtime. In that case, that will really increase your chances. And what you can do is just put your brood box out, ideally 6 to 12 feet off the ground near other hives, and you may get bees just moving right into it going, this is a great spot for our swarm. And that's called a bait hive. Some people put attractants in it, a little bit of lemongrass oil in a Ziploc bag with some pinholes, and that's said to mimic some of the pheromones that bees give off and attract bees to that location as well. You can get a product called Swarm Commander, which is said to help as well. But a bait hive is something you can do, but as said, easiest way, get a nucleus off a bee breeder, transfer them into your brood box, look after them, and they'll grow.
So do you recommend using pre-made beeswax foundation for the brood box?
Now, My father likes to add a couple of sheets of foundation. Some beekeepers like to do all sheets of foundation. Some people like to use plastic foundation in the brood box, and others like to just let the bees draw their natural comb. Now we've got an advantage as a Flo Hive beekeeper because we do not need to dual purpose the frames. They'll only ever be used for brood. So we do not need the wire reinforcement in the frame, which means we do not need to put the foundation in because we're not spinning that in a centrifuge. So we can just let the bees draw it themselves, and that saves a ton of work in the shed at night time, waxing and wiring the frames. I'm so happy I don't have to do that anymore. For the last 8 years we've had the Flo Hives out in the wild, I've just let the bees draw their natural comb just the way they like to. And it's said to have a health benefit for the bees as well. Having said that, it's a little bit more work in the hive because occasionally the bees will go wonky. You'll have to get in there and use your hive tool to straighten the comb out. But I find that more enjoyable. It's a nice thing to do anyway, is to look at the bees as they're developing, and you can just straighten up the comb, and it saves a whole lot of work wiring and waxing, using the jumper leads off a car battery to heat up the wires, melt the wax foundation into position, and so on. And after you've done all of that, it doesn't necessarily guarantee they're going to build straight either. So it will be more likely that they build straight, but doesn't guarantee it. So I go for naturally drawn comb, but each to their own. Conventional beekeepers will really raise their eyebrows at this idea of letting bees draw it themselves, because for the last 100 years or so, we've been reliant on the foundation method, and that's become the dominant method in beekeeping. So suit yourself, see what works for you. You can add wax foundation, plastic foundation, or just put the comb guide in the top and let the bees do it themselves.
Seeds, it's such a wet, drizzly day today, but a few people saying, where are we? And
we're here in the rainy northern rivers of New South Wales, and it's called Northern Rivers for a reason, and that's because we do get a high rainfall here. And it's fantastic because a few weeks back it was quite dry and we had fires, and we were out there firefighting and getting prepped for fires and so on, and it's so great to have the rain here wetting everything down and making for a nice, cool, wet spring and summer.
does the hive need to be in the shade or the sun?
So we did answer that question earlier, but I'll run over it again.
Yep.
If you've got a hive and you've got the choice of full sun or full shade, I will always put the hive in full sun. Reason being is chalk brood is a spore-producing bacterium that can get into your hive, and it's more likely to be an issue in those cold, sort of wet, damp areas. Remedy is move your hive into the full sun, and that'll likely clear it up over time. But keep your hive in the full sun, or even better is if you're in a hot climate, afternoon shade in the summertime will give your bees a helping hand for air conditioning. Bees are incredible little air conditioners. They will collect water, bring it back to the hive. They'll fan with their wings and use evaporative cooling techniques to actually lower the temperature in the hive, and they're very good at it. In cold times, they'll disconnect their wing muscles and vibrate and become heater bees and actually heat up the hive. So whether you're in a hot desert, arid climate, or in somewhere that gets 6 months of knee-deep snow, your bees are incredibly adaptable. The European honeybee is an incredible species at pollination and at being adaptable. That's why humans have dragged them around the world wherever they go, and they've become such an important part of our whole agricultural system because of their extraordinary ability to live in all climates and also do an amazing amount of pollination.
Great, Seeds. Where was the... Oh, you've answered that one about the cold climate. Oh, Colton's asking, has a 10-frame standard brood box, so what size super would they put on?
So the size super is a Flo 7. A Flo 7 will match a 10 frame Langstroth brood box. And there'll be small discrepancies, but it'll more or less be within a few millimetres of your standard 10 frame Langstroth hive.
Right, this is Beth, this could be a good one. Beth's just saying, so can I keep bees on my balcony? Which is exactly what we're doing.
Absolutely, it's a great place to keep bees. A wooden ware will last longer under shelter. You know, in terms of your finish, a cedar hive will last a long time anyway, but your finish will last a long time if it's not continuously getting hit by the elements. People keep bees in the cities, on balconies, on rooftops. It's one of the great things about beekeeping. It's very versatile. You can harvest a real amount of produce from a very small footprint without having to have a processing shed. That's if you choose a Flo Hive. You don't need a whole indoors setup that's bee-proof with your whole extracting line and decapping knife and buckets and storage of honey supers and all of that, that if you're in a conventional beekeeping, then you'll need all of that with a Flo Hive. All you need is this on your balcony and you can harvest a ridiculous amount of beautiful honey to share with your friends. So here we have jar number 7 filling up, all out of one frame. So it's absolutely beautiful. And we've actually got a little bit of a two-tone going on here. When we started harvesting, we had this very light colour. And over time, we've got a darker colour coming out. Have a look at that, isn't that neat? And you will get that variance frame to frame, or sometimes even in one frame, and a different flavour to match. So that's one of the neat things about harvesting from a Flo Hive too, is you're able to isolate those flavours.
Question coming in, and I think when you were explaining the difference between the brood and the super, question is the larvae safe when the combs are shifting when you're harvesting honey?
Great question. The answer is yes. Your queen should not be up here in the super. So it's conventional beekeeping and Flo Hive beekeeping. You put an excluder in place, which is this black line you see here. And it's a grid with 4.3 millimetre orifices. And that allows your worker bees to go through no problem, but your queen's just a little bit too big to get through. So she'll stay down here laying in the bottom box. Having said that, many people do experiment with taking the excluder out, and you've probably got a 50-50% chance whether your queen will lay in the float frames or not. If your queen doesn't lay in the float frames, then she won't, and you can run without an excluder. But if you are experimenting like that, then be sure to check from time to time to make sure she doesn't lay in the flow frames.
The Essential Lady Homeschool, another question. We have a colony in a standard brood box and it's getting close to being full. Just wondering, if we place a full Flo Hive setup next to it, how likely will the colony move over or expand?
Okay, not very likely at all. What you're talking about there is a bait hive. So a bait hive is where you set up your brood box hoping a colony will move in. You're actually best off putting it further away, if you're 100 metres or so from your hive, 6 to 12 feet off the ground. And what you'll then get is increased chance of that hive swarming and moving into it. But the best thing you can do is take a split, and that's one I didn't mention earlier actually. Taking a split from a hive is a great way to get started in beekeeping, where you just take some frames out of the bottom box and put them into your brood box. If there's eggs on those frames, then the hive will actually raise its own queen and get going of its own accord. Look after them and they'll grow.
Cedar, will thick Manuka honey flow from the Flo Hive?
That's a good question, and we've tested this thoroughly here with what we call the jellybush, which is a very close relative of the Manuka. There's about 180 species of leptospermum here in Australia. One of them was Manuka that travelled to New Zealand by birds and ended up covering a lot of area. So we've got a jellybush, very similar one in this very location, and what we find is at about a 50-50 mix, it'll come out in globules and you'll get medicinal honey in your honey jar. We put some effort into isolating to get 100% jellybush in the frames, which is actually hard to do. You'll have to put some effort into getting 100% Manuka or jellybush in your frames, and then you'll find it won't come out. It'll set like jelly in the frames, and then whether you're doing conventional harvesting or Flo Hive harvesting, it's a pain to get out. It will be stuck in there like jelly. It has what's called a thixotropic property, which is if you get a jar of Manuka honey or jellybush honey, you'll find that you can open the lid and turn it upside down, it will not flow out. But if you get a spoon and stir it, then it'll flow out readily. And the thixotropic property is a property where if it's disturbed, it starts to flow for a while, but once it sets, it'll set like jelly. Now, the way they get honey out of frames when they're going after Manuka or jellybush is they get the frame and they prick it with little spikes that go down all the cells as if you're stirring all of those little honey jars. And then in a heated room, they put it in a centrifuge and spin it out. So that's how you'll have to get 100% Manuka or jellybush out of frames, whether it be Flo Hives or conventional frames. Or you can just leave it in there and let the bees consume it. Hopefully they mix it up a bit with some liquid honey next time and it'll flow out readily.
Morel's got wants to transfer a swarm that's in the house wall into a Flo Hive. Just wondering the best way to do it. They've mentioned by eduction. I don't know what eduction is that.
Okay, so the swarm's in the wall?
Yeah, the swarm's in the wall and they want to transfer it to a Flo Hive.
So the most common way is to do what's called a cutout, and if you have a look at our feed, you'll actually see us doing some cutouts. And Pete was doing one recently. He enjoys that process of pulling the wall apart or the roof apart and getting the hive out. What you'll need to do is get the sections of brood and the brood only and rubber band them into frames and put them in the bottom box. The reason why I say don't take the honey as well is because when you've got the brood and as many bees as you can in a box, hopefully you've got the queen as well, then you don't want to give them a whole mess to clean up straight away, or hive beetles might get in and take an opportune moment while the bees haven't got everything in order and lay their eggs, and it might turn into a slimy hive beetle nest instead of a hive. So just take the brood, rubber band them into your wooden frames, and you can then get them out of the wall. However, that is quite destructive to your wall, so then you'll need to fix up the wall and so on. So there are ways to get them out, and I've successfully done it using a cat and dog flea collar. You can make a little incision, maybe in a few spots, listen on the wall, work out where they are, make tiny incisions and feed the collars in. It won't kill the bees, but it will annoy them because they've got an insecticide on them. And you might find a month or two later the bees just abscond. They pack up and they go, this place smells, we're out of here. And I've had that work successfully. My brother's an arborist, and if he's got bees in a tree hollow up a tree, he'll get up there and throw what's even stronger than a flea collar is a cattle tick ear. They have these ear tags that are to keep ticks away. So you throw that into the wall, then that will really annoy them and hopefully get them out of the cavity. If you happen to be around when they're relocating, you could potentially shake them off the branch where they land into your Flo Hive box and away you go. Or you take it a step further and take a pipe out of the wall into your hive, and they might just get out of the wall into your bee box. Another method is to put in that pipe a one-way bee valve, which you can make like a cone of fly mesh, a bit like a crab pot, inside the plastic pipe and you can watch and check that it's working properly, you find it's like a one-way bee valve. You get a whole lot of bees coming out into your box if you pipe that into your box and not being able to get back into the wall. And that is a way that I've had no success with, but you might, at getting bees out of your wall also. Few options there. It's always an interesting challenge. I tend to err on the side of not pulling the wall apart, but people that collect a lot of swarms out of walls just go, I'll just pull the wall apart and get it done. So it's just up to you with that one. I always try and find an easier way. Can't we just turn a handle and the swarm comes out of the wall? And I'll spend a year trying to do it.
You turned it into a renovation, see.
Yeah. Time for a couple more questions. Thank you very much. We've got questions coming in from all channels here, and it's great to have all of your questions. If you've got answers to people's questions, chime in. It's fantastic to have a global audience helping to answer people's questions. We don't necessarily have all the answers here in the subtropics. There's people keeping bees from the deep, snowy winter areas to the arid, hot deserts, and things are different. So local knowledge goes a long way. Sometimes the wrong way. But chime in and let us know your thoughts on any of these questions, and also let us know what you'd like us to cover in the future. We're all ears to help you get started in beekeeping.
How's it tasting, Seeds? What does it taste like?
Oh, it's that, I describe it as a waxy tone. It's one thing that happens with the Flo Hive is you get this real freshness, and we've actually had studies done by universities to show that harvesting from a Flo Hive compared to conventional actually retains the floral notes. And the reason why we think that is the only thing that's got the honey out of the hive is gravity. It hasn't touched any machinery, and as I was talking about earlier, you haven't got the imparted flavours of the metal extractor and so on. You're also not mixing all your flavours together. You're isolating those flavours. So that reminded me of just crunching into fresh honeycomb. And it's something that's often said is, wow, it just tastes like it's biting into honeycomb, yet it's straight out of the jar. And it's, I have to describe it as a waxy flavour today.
How do you deal with an aggressive hive, Seeds? That could be a good one to end on.
So aggressive hives can be a pain, and that really depends on you and those around it, whether it causes any issues. I've got aggressive hives at my home, and I keep them down in the paddock, and I just make sure I wear a good bee suit, and I know they're aggressive, and I just let them stay that way because I can. But if you've got a hive that is showing aggression, it's causing a problem, it's a pain to inspect, you want a nice gentle hive like this that you can stand around, then what you'll need to do is get in there and take the queen away, and a day later put in a queen of known genetics that you've ordered off a queen breeder. You can order queens in the mail in most places, and you'll pop her in the queen cage, and what will happen is the block of candy will get chewed away by the bees. She'll be released into the hive a day or so later, and by that time your hive will be used to the pheromone of the new queen and less likely to kill her. A month later, the whole temperament will change because all of those guard bees have died out, and there's a whole new wave of genetics in your hive. So that's what you'll need to do. If it's a bit daunting as a new beekeeper, then get a hand from somebody who's experienced with requeening to help you get in there in your aggressive hive and find that queen. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you've got questions, you can keep putting them in. If you've got answers, then chime in, help each other get started in beekeeping. It's a fantastic thing to see. And if you want a handhold, great video course to learn from, have a look at thebeekeeper.org. It's free to try. It's also a great fundraiser that's already planted over 1.5 million trees to create billions of blossoms for not only the 20,000 species of bee in the world that desperately need more habitat, but all the other species that rely on habitat as well. So have a look at thebeekeeper.org, gets rave reviews, and it's just a great online course with videos taking you through from square one right through to even a deep scientific knowledge. Thanks for tuning in here with our balcony Flo Hive harvest here on this wet, old, rainy day in the Northern Rivers, New South Wales.